My name is Bethany. I am 34 years old, a medical billing auditor, and a single mother of three. After driving 16 exhausting hours across the country for a family reunion, my aunt blocked the door of our luxury vacation rental, looked at my crying 5-year-old, and told me that real family does not include a divorced failure with extra baggage. I smiled, packed my children back into the car, and made a single phone call that would legally strip her of everything she owned. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your children from the toxic people who share your bloodline. The journey from Chicago to Lake Tahoe, Nevada, had been a grueling marathon of endurance. For 16 hours, I gripped the steering wheel of my battered minivan, navigating endless highways while trying to keep my 3 children entertained. Noah, who is 10, and Liam, who is 8, had been surprisingly patient, sharing a single tablet and taking turns choosing road trip playlists. But my youngest, Emma, was only 5. By the time we crossed the Nevada state line, she was completely inconsolable, her tiny body exhausted from sleeping upright in a car seat, her face sticky with tears and spilled juice. I was running on stale gas station coffee and sheer willpower. As a single mother working 50 hours a week, scrutinizing medical bills and insurance claims, vacations were a luxury I could rarely afford. But when the notification for a group chat titled Tahoe Family Getaway popped up on my phone a month ago, I had felt a desperate spark of hope. My mother, my sister, and my Aunt Brenda had been planning a massive reunion. They posted links to a breathtaking lakeside mansion, photos of the pine trees, and endless messages about how wonderful it would be to have the whole family together under one roof. I had scraped together every spare dollar I had for gas and road snacks. I took unpaid time off work. I wanted my kids to have the kind of magical family vacation I used to see on television, the kind where cousins play in the lake and grandmothers bake cookies. I wanted to prove that despite my difficult divorce 2 years ago, I was still part of the family fabric. When my GPS finally announced that we had reached our destination, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since Illinois. The property was staggering. It was a massive modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling glass windows that reflected the crystal blue waters of Lake Tahoe. A private dock stretched out into the water. Luxury SUVs were parked in the circular driveway. It was the kind of place that rented for $20,000 a week. I parked my dusty, bug-splattered minivan next to a pristine Range Rover and unbuckled my seatbelt, my back aching in protest. "Come on, guys," I said, forcing a cheerful tone as I slid open the heavy side doors. "We made it." Emma was sobbing loudly now, rubbing her eyes with her small fist, demanding a real bed. I scooped her up, balancing her on my hip, while Noah and Liam grabbed their small backpacks. We walked up the grand stone pathways leading to the massive oak front doors. Through the glass panels, I could see shadows moving inside, people holding champagne flutes, the warm glow of a roaring fireplace. My heart swelled with anticipation. I reached for the brass handle, but before my fingers could touch it, the heavy door swung open. My Aunt Brenda stood in the doorway. At 58 years old, Brenda was a woman who weaponized her wealth and status. She was wearing a flowing silk resort outfit, holding a crystal glass of wine, and her face was pulled into a tight, displeased frown. She did not look at me with the warmth of an aunt welcoming her niece. She looked at me like I was a salesperson who had bypassed the security gate. The noise of the party behind her spilled out into the crisp mountain air, but she quickly stepped onto the porch and pulled the door partially shut behind her, physically blocking the entrance. "Aunt Brenda," I said, panting slightly under Emma's weight. We finally made it. The traffic through Salt Lake City was terrible. Brenda did not smile. Her eyes darted from my stained sweatshirt down to Noah and Liam, who were standing quietly in their wrinkled travel clothes, and finally to Emma, whose cries were echoing across the pristine driveway. "Who invited you?" Brenda asked. Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp enough to cut glass. I froze. The welcoming smile I had prepared died on my lips. "What do you mean, the group chat? You sent the address on Wednesday. I told everyone I was driving down." Brenda took a slow sip of her wine. That group chat was for the general family updates, Bethany. It was not a personal invitation to crash our vacation. This week is for real family, not a divorced failure carrying extra baggage. The words hit me with the physical force of a sledgehammer. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at her, searching for the punchline, waiting for her to laugh and step aside. But her eyes were dead and cold. She meant every single word. But I drove 16 hours. I whispered, my voice trembling as I tightened my grip on my crying daughter. My kids have been in the car for 2 days. We just need to come inside, wash up, and figure this out. No, Brenda said smoothly, her tone entirely devoid of empathy. You need to turn around and leave. You are ruining the aesthetic of this trip. You always bring this chaotic, depressing energy everywhere you go, and we simply are not doing that this week. This is an upscale retreat, Bethany, not a charity shelter for you and your mistakes. She gestured dismissively toward Noah and Liam, calling my beautiful innocent boys mistakes right to their faces. Noah, who was old enough to understand exactly what was happening, shrank back, his lower lip trembling. He grabbed his younger brother's hand and pulled him a step closer to the minivan. In that horrible suspended moment, I realized the absolute cruelty of what had just occurred. They had not forgotten to tell me I was uninvited. They had watched my messages in the group chat. They had seen my updates about packing the car, about crossing state lines, about how excited the kids were. They let me drive across the country, spending money I barely had, knowing exactly what Brenda was going to do when I arrived at the front door. It was not an oversight. It was an ambush. It was a calculated, deliberate trap designed to humiliate me and remind me of my place at the absolute bottom of the family hierarchy. I looked past Brenda's silk-draped shoulder, my eyes desperately scanning the cavernous living room behind her for any sign of salvation. Through the expansive glass panels, past the roaring stone fireplace, I finally saw her. My mother, Susan. She was 60 years old, but spent a fortune trying to look 40, dressed in a pristine white cashmere sweater that looked utterly out of place for a rustic mountain retreat. I caught her eye. I knew she saw me. I knew she saw Noah shrinking back toward the cold driveway and Emma sobbing into my neck. I waited for her maternal instinct to kick in, waiting for her to push past Brenda and wrap her arms around her exhausted grandchildren. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate sip from her stemmed wine glass and looked away. "Mom!" I called out, my voice cracking under the crushing weight of my exhaustion. "Mom, tell her we drove all day. The kids are freezing." Susan finally moved, but not toward the front door. She drifted toward the grand foyer, her movements stiff, her gaze fixed firmly on the polished hardwood floor rather than on my face. She stopped a few feet behind Brenda, hovering like a ghost in her own family. "Just go, Bethany," she said softly, waving her hand in a vague, dismissive gesture. "Amanda and Trayvon need peace for their business meetings. We cannot have the children screaming through the halls." The words felt like physical blows to my chest. My own mother. The woman who had watched me struggle to rebuild my life from scratch after a devastating divorce, who knew I audited medical bills late into the night just to keep the lights on and put food on the table for her grandchildren. She was choosing the comfort of her wealthy sister over the safety of her own flesh and blood. But then again, she always did. My entire life had been a masterclass in coming in last. Susan had always lived under Brenda's domineering shadow, too weak and too comfortable to ever assert herself, and she had proudly passed that toxic hierarchy down to her daughters. I was the designated scapegoat, the cautionary tale, while my younger sister was the undeniable golden child. Right on cue, the golden child made her grand entrance. Amanda appeared at the top of the sweeping wooden staircase and floated down into the foyer. At 31 years old, she looked like she had just stepped off the glossy pages of a luxury country club catalog. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, and she wore a beige cashmere loungewear set that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She descended the stairs with an expression of profound irritation, her manicured fingers pressing against her temples, as if my very existence was giving her a migraine. "What is all that noise?" Amanda complained, her voice echoing sharply in the grand entryway. Trayvon is trying to go over the real estate projections in the study, and we can hear that child wailing all the way down the hall. She stepped up beside Brenda, crossing her arms as she looked me up and down. She did not greet me. She did not ask how the grueling 2-day drive was. She simply stared at my coffee-stained sweatshirt and then glared at my terrified sons. "You really brought the whole circus, didn't you?" Amanda sneered, her eyes raking over my battered sneakers. "We told you this was an exclusive trip. We are trying to conduct serious business here, Bethany. Trayvon has major investors on the line. We do not have time to babysit your life choices." I gripped Emma tighter, my fingernails digging into my own palms to stop my hands from visibly shaking. "They are your nephews and your niece Amanda," I said, my voice dropping to a low, hard whisper. "They are your family, and it is freezing out here in the mountains." Amanda sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes, as if my plea for basic human decency was the ultimate burden on her perfect manicured life. She unclasped her designer purse, digging past a thick wad of receipts and high-end cosmetics. She pulled out a crisp, folded $100 bill. With a careless flick of her wrist, she tossed it through the crack in the door. The green bill fluttered through the cold mountain air and landed directly in the dirt at my feet. "Go find a cheap roadside motel," Amanda said, her upper lip curling in absolute disgust. "You are ruining the vibe here. Take your kids and get out of our sight before you embarrass yourself any further." I stared at the paper resting in the dirt. $100. That was their price to sleep with a clear conscience while sending 3 young children out into the freezing Nevada night. I looked back up at the 3 women standing in the warm, brightly lit foyer. Brenda looked triumphant, her chin raised in a posture of absolute authority. Amanda looked bored, already turning her attention back to her phone. And Susan, my mother, simply took another sip of her wine, refusing to meet my eyes, as she let her sister and her favorite daughter throw her grandchildren out like trash. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Emma's muffled sniffles against my collarbone and the harsh wind whipping through the pine trees. I realized then that begging would not change their minds. Pleading for empathy from people who possessed none was a total waste of breath. They had orchestrated this entire scenario to remind me that my struggles were repulsive to them, that my lack of a wealthy husband made me entirely unworthy of their inner circle. Trevin and Amanda were busy expanding their real estate empire. Brenda was playing the wealthy matriarch, and my mother was perfectly happy to ride their coattails. They did not want family. They wanted an audience for their financial success, and my messy, hardworking reality did not fit their flawless script. I did not give them the satisfaction of my tears. I did not beg. I simply shifted Emma's weight on my hip, looked Amanda dead in the eye, and lifted my dirt-caked sneaker. I brought my foot down directly on top of her crisp $100 bill, grinding it into the damp gravel of the driveway. "Keep your money, Amanda," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady. "You are going to need it to buy yourself a conscience." Brenda's face flushed red with indignation, and she moved to slam the heavy oak door in my face. But in that split second, before the thick wood shut me out into the cold, my eyes darted past her. 10 years as a medical billing auditor had trained me to scan environments for anomalies, to spot the one piece of paper that did not belong in a file. Resting on the ornate console table in the grand foyer, illuminated by a crystal lamp, was a thick stack of manila folders. The top page was flipped open, displaying a bold, geometric logo I recognized instantly. It was the insignia for my brother-in-law Trevon's real estate investment firm. Printed across the header in bold black ink were the words "Property Appraisal and Transfer of Deed." The heavy door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked loudly. The harsh sound echoed in the freezing air, snapping my attention back to the present. I turned away from the mansion, swallowing the bitter taste of betrayal, and marched my children back to the minivan. Noah, my brave 10-year-old, silently helped his younger brother Liam buckle into his seat. I wrapped Emma in her fleece blanket, kissed her tear-stained forehead, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered in the biting mountain air before roaring to life. The heater blasted cold air for the first 10 minutes as I navigated the treacherous, winding roads, away from the luxury resorts, and down toward the base of the mountain. It took 45 minutes of driving through the pitch-black Nevada night to find a place I could afford. The flickering red neon sign of a roadside motel illuminated the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. It advertised rooms for $60 a night. It was a far cry from the $20,000 mansion my mother and aunt were currently enjoying, but it had a roof and 4 walls. I parked the van, paid the bored clerk at the front desk with a credit card that was already nearing its limit, and guided my exhausted children into room 114. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke masked by aggressive lemon bleach. The floral bedspreads were worn thin, and the heater rattled violently when I turned it up. But as I pulled back the covers and tucked my kids into the 2 creaky double beds, none of them complained. I bought a package of generic chocolate chip cookies and 2 bottles of apple juice from the vending machine down the hall. We sat on the edge of the bed eating our makeshift dinner in quiet solidarity. "Why doesn't Grandma Susan want us?" Liam asked softly, his little fingers picking at the edge of his cookie. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I pulled him against my chest, resting my chin on top of his head. "This has absolutely nothing to do with you, baby," I whispered fiercely, making sure Noah and Emma were listening too. "Grandma Susan and Aunt Brenda are broken inside. They care about looking important more than they care about being good people. You 3 are the most precious things in the world, and I will never let anyone treat you like you do not matter. Ever again." Once the kids were finally asleep, huddled together under the thin motel blankets, I sat at the small, wobbly desk in the corner of the room. The cheap desk lamp cast a sickly yellow glow over my hands. The sting of rejection and the fierce protective instincts of a mother slowly gave way to cold, clinical logic. My brain, hardwired to detect financial discrepancies and untangle complex billing fraud, began processing the scene I had witnessed in the foyer. Trevin was a brilliant African-American real estate investor who had built a massive portfolio by ruthlessly flipping commercial properties in Chicago. He was highly strategic. He did not take vacations unless there was a payout involved. He certainly did not bring official transfer of deed documents to a family mountain retreat just to catch up on administrative paperwork. Amanda had explicitly mentioned that Trayvon had major investors on the line and needed absolute peace to conduct serious business. But what business they were in Lake Tahoe, hundreds of miles away from his usual market? Why would he need property appraisals here? Then a chilling thought struck me, settling heavy and cold in my stomach. The puzzle pieces started locking together. Brenda had been acting as the absolute gatekeeper for our grandmother Helen. 3 months ago, Brenda had aggressively convinced my mother and the rest of the extended family that Helen was suffering from rapid onset dementia. Brenda had used that excuse to obtain temporary power of attorney, subsequently moving Helen from her beautiful, sprawling estate into a low-tier, highly restrictive nursing home facility. Brenda claimed it was for Helen's own safety and that the old house was too much to manage. But Helen owned a massive debt-free estate worth millions of dollars. And now Trayvon was sitting in a rented mansion reviewing property appraisals and transfer of deed documents alongside Brenda, while intentionally locking me out of the inner circle. I was the only auditor in the family. I was the only one who demanded to see paper trails and questioned expenses. They knew that if I was sitting in that living room, I would ask exactly what they were signing and why Trayvon was involved in family assets. The realization hit me with sickening clarity. This was never a family reunion. This was a corporate boardroom meeting disguised as a luxury vacation, and I was the only variable they could not control. They threw me out because they were about to steal everything my grandmother had ever built. The realization hit me like a splash of ice water washing away the last traces of self-pity. I was no longer the rejected daughter shivering on a gravel driveway. I was a professional auditor staring at a massive coordinated fraud. I stood up from the wobbly desk chair, ensuring my breathing remained steady and quiet so I would not wake my children. I walked over to my frayed canvas duffel bag slumped in the dark corner of the room. I bypassed my neatly folded clothes, reached beneath the false bottom I had crafted from a stiff piece of cardboard, and pulled out a cheap, prepaid burner phone. I bought this device with cash at a convenience store 3 months ago, deliberately registering it under a fake name to leave absolutely zero paper trail. 3 months prior, my Aunt Brenda had orchestrated a swift and brutal takeover of my grandmother Helen's life. Brenda called an emergency family meeting, crying crocodile tears, claiming Helen had wandered out of her massive estate and could not remember her own name. Brenda presented highly questionable medical documents from a private doctor who happened to be her personal friend, declaring that our 85-year-old grandmother suffered from rapid onset severe dementia. Before anyone could question the diagnosis or demand a second opinion, Brenda used her new temporary power of attorney to lock Helen inside a dismal low-tier nursing facility. My mother Susan nodded along with the tragic narrative, eager to avoid the burden of elder care and happy to let Brenda take the reins. But I was the only one who actually visited Helen. I sat in that depressing linoleum-floored room smelling of industrial bleach and boiled vegetables and listened to my grandmother meticulously dissect the global stock market, quote, classic literature and balance her investment portfolios entirely from memory. She was perfectly razor-sharply sane. Brenda had essentially imprisoned a brilliant, wealthy woman to seize unrestricted control of her assets. Knowing Brenda heavily monitored the facility's landline and aggressively restricted visitors, I smuggled this burner phone to Helen, carefully tucked inside a hollowed-out box of facial tissues during my last visit. I glanced at the digital clock on the motel nightstand. It was flashing red, displaying 2 in the morning. I pressed the single speed dial button I had programmed. The line rang once, twice. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. If a night nurse found the phone, Brenda would be notified immediately, and Helen would be moved somewhere I could never find her. On the third ring, a voice answered. It was not the frail, confused whisper Brenda sold to the rest of the family. Bethany. Is that you? Helen asked. Her voice was crisp, authoritative, and completely devoid of sleep. Yes, Grandma, it is me, I whispered, clutching the phone tightly against my ear. Are you safe? Can anyone hear you talking right now? My roommate is completely deaf and snoring loud enough to wake the dead. Helen replied briskly. What is wrong? You know the protocol. You only call on this line if there is a severe emergency. Did Brenda do something to you? I took a deep breath, organizing my chaotic emotions into clear, actionable bullet points, exactly how I would present a complex audit report to a hospital board. I told her everything. I detailed the grueling 16-hour drive, the ambush at the front doors of the Tahoe mansion, my own mother refusing to intervene, and Amanda tossing $100 bill at my feet like I was a beggar. Helen listened in absolute silence. She did not interrupt with dramatic gasps or performative tears. She absorbed the information like a seasoned general listening to a critical battlefield briefing. Then I dropped the crucial piece of evidence. Grandma, they did not just rent that mansion for a family vacation. I saw a thick stack of manila folders on their foyer console table. They had Traven's real estate investment firm logo printed boldly on them, and they were clearly marked as property appraisals and transfer of deed documents. A sharp, humorless laugh crackled through the phone speaker. Helen did not need a second to put the puzzle pieces together. That greedy, predictable vulture, Helen said, her tone dripping with absolute contempt for her eldest daughter. Brenda is trying to bypass the standard probate period. She knows her temporary power of attorney is facing a mandatory legal review next month. She brought Trevon into the mix to quickly liquidate my assets before a court-appointed guardian can evaluate my actual mental state. They are going to use Trayvon's company to purchase my estate for pennies on the dollar, claiming they desperately needed to sell my home to pay for my ongoing medical care. I felt a massive surge of validation. I was not crazy. I was not just a bitter, excluded relative projecting malice onto innocent family members. I was staring down a multi-million-dollar heist. They threw me out because they knew I would demand to read the fine print, I said, pacing the short length of the motel room. They know I audit contracts for a living. If I was sitting in that living room, I would have stopped them from executing the paperwork. Exactly, Helen replied. Brenda always thought she was the smartest person in the room, but she severely underestimated both of us. She thinks I am rotting away in this sterile bed, staring blankly at the wall. And she thinks you are a weak, defeated single mother who will just cry and crawl back to Chicago with your tail between your legs. I looked over at Noah, Liam, and Emma, breathing softly under the scratchy motel blankets. I thought about the sheer disrespect Amanda and Susan showed them, treating my precious children like stray animals, ruining their aesthetic. I felt a cold, hard resolve anchor itself deep in my chest. I was not going to crawl anywhere. What do we do now? I asked, my voice steady and cold. Helen did not hesitate. We strike back. It is time to initiate the contingency plan we discussed last month. Brenda wants to play corporate raider with my life. We are going to show her what a hostile takeover actually looks like. Are you near a computer, Bethany? Yes, I replied, pulling my sleek work laptop from my bag and flipping the screen open. Good, Helen said, her voice sharpening into a lethal edge. Open it up. I am going to give you my secure login credentials. We are going to track exactly how Brenda paid for that luxury mansion, and then we are going to burn her fraudulent empire to the ground. I booted up my laptop. The harsh blue light from the screen illuminated the cheap motel room, casting long shadows against the peeling floral wallpaper. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as Helen rattled off a string of complex passwords. She had memorized them flawlessly, a sharp contrast to the woman Brenda claimed could not remember her own middle name. I navigated directly to the primary portal for her main investment accounts and healthcare management systems. The loading screen spun for a fraction of a second before revealing the dashboard. I waited for her to direct my search, but Helen took a deep, measured breath, the sound crackling through the burner phone speaker. She needed me to understand the full, terrifying scope of the betrayal before I started pulling the numbers. They did not gather everyone in Lake Tahoe just to drink expensive wine and celebrate a real estate transaction. Helen explained, her voice steady, but laced with a cold, calculated fury. Brenda needs a consensus. My temporary power of attorney is extremely vulnerable right now. If a judge orders an independent medical evaluation, Brenda loses control of my life instantly. She needs the entire family to sign a unified legal declaration stating that my condition has deteriorated beyond repair. They are using this luxurious weekend to convince your easily manipulated cousins and aunts that placing me in a permanent Medicaid lockdown facility is the only compassionate option. A lockdown facility. The phrase sent a visceral chill straight down my spine. That was not a nursing home or an assisted living community. That was a prison. Once admitted under a unified family directive, Helen would be stripped of her basic civil rights. She would not have access to a phone, she could not request a lawyer, and she certainly could not contest a fraudulent property sale. Brenda was orchestrating a legal burial while Helen was still breathing. They were going to trap a perfectly sane, brilliant woman behind locked doors just to drain her bank accounts. They would drug her into compliance and isolate her from the outside world forever. Once they lock me away, Brenda has a clear path to liquidate the estate. Helen continued, her tone strictly business. My primary residence sits on prime, highly coveted land. A conservative appraisal puts the property at $4.5 million. I pulled up a blank spreadsheet on my laptop, my auditor instincts entirely taking over as I typed the numbers. 4.5 million. I asked Helen what Trayvon was offering in this sham transaction. Brenda is selling the estate to Trayvon's investment firm for $800,000, Helen said. They will claim it was a distressed sale required to cover my sudden astronomical medical care costs. Trayvon and Amanda will hold the property for a few months under his corporate umbrella. They will do a superficial cosmetic renovation to justify a new massive appraisal, and then they will flip it on the open market for its true value. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. The math was sickeningly brilliant. They would generate nearly $4 million in untaxed illicit profit. Brenda takes the largest cut for facilitating the fraudulent transfer using her power of attorney. Trayvon and Amanda keep a massive percentage for laundering the asset through his real estate firm. And my mother Susan gets her quiet, comfortable payout for looking the other way and rallying the rest of the family to sign my commitment papers. My stomach violently turned. I looked over at the two creaky double beds where my children slept peacefully huddled together for warmth. For 34 years, I had made excuses for my mother. I had told myself she was just passive, that she hated conflict, that she could not help folding under Brenda's dominant personality. But this was not passivity. This was calculated greed. My mother had looked at these boys, her own flesh and blood grandchildren, and let them be cast out into the freezing night just to protect her share of stolen money. Susan was not just a weak woman living in her older sister's shadow. She was an active, willing accomplice to the financial and physical destruction of her own mother. She traded her moral compass for a luxury payout, and she threw me away because she knew my presence would instantly disrupt the transaction. They knew I audited medical billing and complex financial claims for a living. They knew I would demand to read the fine print of any document Brenda placed on that foyer table. The sheer audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. Trayvon, with his slick suits and arrogant smirk, was using his legitimate real estate license to commit grand theft. Amanda was eager to fund her country club lifestyle by selling out her own grandmother. And Brenda was the mastermind pulling the strings and hiding behind a fake diagnosis. I am looking at the transaction history now. Grandma? I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper as my fingers flew across the keyboard. I am going to find exactly where she slipped up. Brenda is arrogant, and arrogant people always leave paper trails. Helen sighed, a sound of profound relief mixed with absolute determination. I built that wealth through decades of hard work, Bethany. I will not let them steal it to fund their vanity. Take them down, sweetheart. Leave nothing standing. I hung up the burner phone and placed it gently on the wobbly motel desk. The digital clock glowing beside my laptop read exactly 2 in the morning. Outside, the highway was dead quiet, but inside my head, sirens were blaring. I cracked my knuckles, rolled my shoulders back, and stared at the glowing screen. For years, my family had treated my career as a joke. They viewed my job as some tedious, low-level administrative task that paled in comparison to Trayvon's flashy real estate flips or Amanda's country club networking. They thought I just pushed papers. They did not understand that a senior medical billing auditor is a forensic investigator. I hunt ghosts in financial ledgers for a living. I track down missing decimal points that represent millions of dollars in corporate fraud. And tonight I was hunting my own aunt. I navigated to the primary Medicare portal first, typing in the secure credentials Helen had provided. The authentication code pinged to the burner phone, and I bypassed the security wall. Next, I opened 2 new tabs, logging into Helen's supplemental private health insurance and her primary checking account. I arranged the 3 windows side by side on my screen. I did not just look at the bottom line balances. Amateurs look at balances. Auditors look at transaction histories, routing numbers, and diagnostic billing codes. I started with the facility where Brenda had dumped Helen 3 months ago. I pulled up the tax identification number for the nursing home and ran it through a public provider database. It was exactly what Helen had described, a bottom-tier state-subsidized facility designed for wards of the state who had absolutely no assets. The base cost for a bed there was minimal, covered entirely by Helen's basic Medicare. Then I cross-referenced that with Helen's personal checking account. My eyes narrowed as I scrolled down the digital ledger. Every single month, on the first day of the month, exactly $12,500 was being electronically transferred out of Helen's private estate account. The transaction description simply read Premium Memory Care and Residential Services. I highlighted the routing number attached to that transfer. It did not belong to the nursing home. I opened a 4th tab, accessing the state corporate registry database. I typed in the routing number and the receiving entity's name. The search engine spun for a moment before spitting out a registered limited liability company. The LLC was registered in Illinois. The managing director listed on the public filing was Brenda. My blood ran ice cold. Brenda was not just restricting Helen's freedom, she was actively embezzling. Brenda was paying the state minimum to keep Helen trapped in a dismal, understaffed ward while automatically siphoning over $12,000 a month into her own private shell company, under the guise of premium healthcare costs. It was textbook financial abuse of an elder executed with a level of arrogance that frankly insulted my professional intelligence. But I knew Brenda would not stop there. Greed is an absolute sickness, and once someone gets away with stealing thousands, they start looking for hundreds of thousands. I pivoted my attention to the medical billing codes submitted under Helen's insurance policies. I filtered the data by current procedural terminology codes, specifically looking for high-ticket items billed over the last 90 days. The screen populated with a staggering list of fraudulent claims. Brenda, utilizing her temporary power of attorney, had authorized the purchase of a motorized, custom-fitted wheelchair. Helen walked 2 miles a day unassisted before Brenda locked her up. There were bills for intense daily cognitive behavioral therapy sessions, specialized dietary supplements, and expensive in-home nursing equipment that had allegedly been delivered to the facility. None of these services or items actually existed. Brenda was approving invoices from phantom medical supply companies, allowing them to bill Helen's private insurance and likely taking a massive kickback from the suppliers. She was building a mountain of fake medical debt to legally justify why Helen's $4.5 million estate needed to be liquidated so quickly. Brenda was creating a paper trail of financial distress. When the court-appointed guardian eventually reviewed the case, Brenda would point to these fabricated astronomical healthcare costs and claim she had absolutely no choice but to sell the family estate to Trayvon to keep Helen out of bankruptcy. I downloaded the explanation of benefits for every single fake claim. I exported the banking ledgers. I took high-resolution screenshots of the LLC registry, linking Brenda directly to the embezzled funds. I saved everything to a secure encrypted folder on my hard drive, organizing the files with meticulous chronological precision. I was building a prosecution file that any district attorney would salivate over. The sheer depravity of it made my chest ache. My aunt was slowly draining my grandmother's life savings to fund her own lavish lifestyle, and my mother was sitting right next to her drinking expensive wine and laughing while it happened. Susan had to know. Even if Susan did not understand the exact mechanics of the wire transfers and the fake billing codes, she knew her own mother was not receiving $12,000 a month worth of premium care in a state-run facility. Susan chose a luxury vacation over her mother's life. The motel room heater rattled loudly in the corner, blowing dry, warm air over my freezing hands. I took a sip of the tepid tap water I had poured hours ago. My eyes were burning from staring at the bright screen, but I was nowhere near finished. I had uncovered the monthly embezzlement and the insurance fraud, but I needed the immediate smoking gun. I needed the direct link tying tonight's lavish Tahoe gathering to Brenda's financial crimes. I pulled up the most recent 30 days of transaction history on Helen's primary estate account. I bypassed the recurring fraudulent monthly charges and started filtering for isolated massive expenditures. If Brenda was arrogant enough to steal $12,000 a month for fake memory care, how did she pay for the $20,000 a week vacation rental? I tapped the trackpad, sorting the transactions by amount, descending from highest to lowest. The screen refreshed, and a massive red line item appeared right at the top of the ledger. It was a transaction cleared just 48 hours ago. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes tracing the digital footprint that was about to become Brenda's ultimate undoing. The vendor name listed next to the $20,000 withdrawal was Tahoe Summit Luxury Rentals. I clicked on the digital receipt icon embedded in the banking portal. A high-resolution document loaded onto my screen. It was a finalized rental agreement for a 7-bedroom lakefront property. The dates matched this exact week. The primary guest listed was Brenda. The billing address was Brenda's home in Chicago. But the funding source was undeniably Helen's restricted medical emergency savings account. As an auditor, my brain immediately categorized the severity of the crime. Brenda had authorized an electronic transfer of funds from an Illinois financial institution to a Nevada real estate management company. She used an interstate telecommunications network to execute a fraudulent transaction under a deceptive premise. That was not just a state-level misdemeanor or simple family theft. That was a textbook violation of federal law. It was federal wire fraud. I scrolled down to the memo line Brenda had entered to bypass the bank's fraud detection algorithms for large withdrawals on a senior citizen's account. She had typed therapeutic relocation and respite care services. She actually had the audacity to categorize a luxury family vacation, complete with a wine cellar and a private dock, as a medical necessity for the 85-year-old woman she had locked in a miserable, underfunded nursing home facility. A wave of pure, unfiltered rage washed over me. I looked back at the cheap motel door, imagining the bitter wind howling outside. My aunt had stood in the warm, glowing foyer of a mansion paid for by my grandmother's healthcare fund, looked at my freezing, crying children, and told us we were not real family. My sister Amanda had tossed a single $100 bill at my feet, like I was a stray dog completely oblivious, or entirely uncaring that she was sipping champagne bought with stolen money. My mother had watched it all happen, protecting her free vacation at the expense of her own grandchildren. I did not cry. I did not scream. I turned that rage into absolute clinical focus. I created a master folder on my encrypted hard drive. I named it Helen Trust Audit. Inside, I created subfolders for bank statements, forged medical claims, embezzlement, LLC, and interstate wire fraud. I meticulously downloaded the $20,000 rental receipt. I saved the digital signature log showing Brenda's internet protocol address authorizing the transfer. I exported the last 12 months of banking spreadsheet files highlighting every single unauthorized withdrawal. I captured the fake invoice Brenda had submitted to the bank to justify the Tahoe rental, complete with a forged doctor's recommendation for environmental therapy. I captured everything with timestamps, ensuring the chain of custody for the digital evidence was flawless. Then I realized I needed to check if Trayvon had already dipped his hands into the accounts. If Amanda and Trayvon were planning to buy Helen's estate for $800,000, there had to be an earnest money deposit or an appraisal fee on the books to make the transaction look legitimate on the surface. I ran a quick search for Trayvon's company name in the ledger. There it was. A transfer of $5,000 processed 10 days ago, flagged as estate valuation consulting. Brenda had paid Trayvon with Helen's own money to appraise the house he was about to steal. That meant Trayvon was not just a passive beneficiary of Brenda's scheme. He was an active participant receiving illicitly obtained funds. As an African-American real estate investor who had built a prominent reputation in the Chicago market, his broker license was his entire livelihood. Now that license was officially built on a foundation of federal crimes. He had accepted money from a vulnerable adults medical fund to facilitate a predatory property transfer. I reviewed the digital mountain of evidence I had just compiled. In less than 2 hours, I had dismantled Brenda's entire fake empire. She thought she was untouchable because she held a piece of paper granting her temporary power of attorney. She fundamentally misunderstood how the law worked. A power of attorney is a fiduciary duty, a strict legal obligation to act solely in the best financial and medical interest of the principal. Using those powers to fund a luxury vacation while the principal sat in a state-subsidized lockdown facility was an automatic trigger for criminal prosecution. I leaned back in the creaky wooden chair and rubbed my tired eyes. The cheap heater in the corner of the motel room kicked on again, blowing dry air over my stiff shoulders. I checked the time. It was approaching 4 in the morning. I closed the banking portals, double-checking to ensure no trace of my login remained in the browser history. I safely ejected my external hard drive and slipped it into the zippered pocket of my heavy winter jacket. The hardest part of the investigation was complete. I had the paper trail, the bank routing numbers, the forged invoices, and the proof of wire fraud. I had everything I needed to put my aunt in federal prison and strip my brother-in-law of his professional credentials. Now came the execution. I needed legal firepower to turn these digital files into handcuffs and eviction notices. I looked over at the 2 double beds. Noah was holding Liam's hand in his sleep, his protective older brother, instincts active even while unconscious. Emma was curled into a small ball, breathing softly. They had been treated like garbage by the very people who should have loved them unconditionally. I stood up and pulled the thin motel blanket higher over Emma's shoulders. I had promised to protect them. By tomorrow morning, the people who had hurt them would learn exactly what happens when you underestimate a mother who knows how to read the fine print. I packed my laptop into my bag and sat on the edge of the bed waiting for the sun to rise. The first rays of morning light crept through the gap in the cheap motel curtains, casting a gray, dusty hue over the room. I had not slept a single minute. My mind was running at top speed, calculating timelines, legal statutes, and the exact sequence of events required to execute my plan. The highway outside began to hum with early commuter traffic. Inside, my children started to stir. Noah woke first, rubbing his eyes and looking around the unfamiliar room with a cautious expression. I immediately put on a warm, reassuring smile. I ordered a modest breakfast of pancakes and scrambled eggs from the diner next door, ensuring my kids felt safe and completely insulated from the toxic storm brewing just up the mountain. As Liam and Emma were digging into their syrup-covered pancakes, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a message notification. It was my mother. I stared at the name Susan for a long moment before picking up the device. I unlocked the screen and read the message. "I hope you found a place. Amanda is so stressed because of your scene yesterday. You need to apologize to her and Trayvon. They are dealing with very important investors today, and your dramatic exit really ruined the mood. Please be mature about this." I read the words 3 times, letting the sheer unfiltered audacity of her message wash over me. A mother had watched her daughter and 3 young grandchildren get cast out into the freezing night, and her primary concern was that my departure had negatively impacted the aesthetic vibe for her golden child. Susan was demanding an apology. She wanted me to grovel to accept my role as the family scapegoat, and to smooth over the uncomfortable reality of their cruelty. Yesterday, a text like that would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and tears. I would have drafted a dozen responses trying to defend my actions and beg for her understanding. Today, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, surgical detachment. My mother was not a parent to me anymore. She was simply a co-conspirator in a federal crime. Psychological warfare relies on the element of absolute terrifying surprise. I knew exactly what was happening in that $20,000 rental property right now. Susan was likely sitting at the massive granite kitchen island, sipping a premium espresso, expecting my usual subservient apology. Instead, I tapped the reply box and prepared to drop a digital grenade directly onto her breakfast plate. I did not write a paragraph. I did not express my hurt or try to explain my side of the story. I simply typed a single devastating sentence. "Enjoy the mansion, Mom. It is paid for with Grandma's heart medication money." I hit send. I pictured the color draining from her artificially youthful face. I pictured the sudden suffocating panic as she realized her discarded daughter knew exactly where the funding for her luxury vacation originated. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. Susan was calling. The screen flashed with her contact photo, a picture of her and Amanda smiling at a country club luncheon. I stared at the incoming call, feeling the undeniable shift in power. For 34 years, she had held all the emotional leverage. She dictated my worth, policed my tone, and demanded my compliance. Now she was the one panicking. The phone kept vibrating. I let it ring. I let her sit in that agonizing silence, knowing her imagination was running wild. When the call finally went to voicemail, she immediately called again. This time I did not just let it ring. I tapped the red icon declining the call. Then I opened her contact settings, scrolled to the bottom of the screen, and pressed block caller. I did the same for Brenda, Amanda, and Trayvon. They were officially cut off. They could not manipulate me, threaten me, or negotiate with me. They were trapped in their own guilt, left to stew in the terrifying realization that their entire criminal enterprise was exposed. Silence is a weapon, and I wielded it with absolute precision. But I could not fight this war with my children in the crossfire. I needed them completely isolated from the fallout. I opened my laptop and accessed a highly rated, fully vetted local childcare agency I had found during my late-night research. I paid a premium rush fee to hire a certified background-checked sitter. Within an hour, a kind professional woman named Clara arrived at the motel room. She brought a tote bag full of board games, art supplies, and movies. I pulled Noah aside, handing him a $20 bill for the vending machine and kissing his forehead. I told him I had some very important paperwork to handle for Grandma Helen, and that he needed to be the man of the house for a few hours. Noah nodded, his young face serious and understanding. I hugged Liam and Emma tightly, promising them we would go get ice cream the absolute second I returned. I grabbed my heavy winter jacket and slipped the encrypted hard drive containing all the financial evidence safely into the inner pocket. I slung my professional leather tote bag over my shoulder, the same bag I carried into high-stakes hospital audits. I was no longer the exhausted mother in the stained sweatshirt begging for entry at a wooden door. I was the sole trustee of a multi-million-dollar estate, and I was about to execute a hostile takeover. I walked out of the motel room, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. I unlocked my minivan, slid into the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel. My family thought they had successfully discarded me, believing I would just drive back to Chicago in tears. They had no idea I was currently mobilizing a strike team to dismantle their entire lives. It was time to make my next move. I pulled out of the motel parking lot and found a quiet spot behind a local diner where the cellular signal was strong. I parked the minivan, connected my laptop to my mobile hotspot, and pulled up the contact card for Thomas Reed. Thomas was 60 years old and served as the fierce longtime trust attorney for my grandmother Helen. He was a legal shark who wore immaculately tailored suits and was known throughout the Chicago legal community for utterly destroying anyone who attempted to exploit his elderly clients. When Helen secretly decided to protect her assets 6 months ago, Thomas was the brilliant architect behind her irrevocable trust. He had warned us that Brenda would eventually make a desperate move. He just did not expect her to be this incredibly reckless. I dialed his direct private line. He answered on the second ring with his usual crisp, no-nonsense tone. I did not waste time with pleasantries or apologies for calling so early on a weekend. I told him Brenda had initiated her endgame. I explained that the Tahoe family reunion was a massive cover story to isolate the family and force a permanent Medicaid lockdown facility declaration. Then I dropped the heaviest piece of information. I told him Trevon was currently sitting in the rented mansion with property transfer documents for Helen's primary estate. I am sending you a secure encrypted folder right now, I said, hitting the send button on my email client. It contains a complete medical billing audit, bank transaction ledgers, and proof of federal wire fraud. I found the smoking gun, Thomas. Brenda used Grandma's restricted medical emergency fund to pay for the Tahoe luxury rental. I heard the distinct chime of an incoming email on his end. Thomas fell silent. For 5 agonizing minutes, the only sound on the line was the rapid, aggressive clicking of his computer mouse and his sharp intakes of breath as he processed the digital evidence I had compiled. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. It was the exact kind of calm that precedes a devastating legal storm. "Bethany, this is impeccable work," he said, the sheer professional respect evident in his tone. "You have handed me a fully loaded gun. The sheer incompetence of using an elder's medical fund to pay for a vacation rental across state lines is staggering. This is wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and criminal embezzlement, all wrapped into one remarkably stupid package. Brenda has practically gift-wrapped her own federal indictment." I felt a surge of professional pride, but the urgency of the situation quickly grounded me. "They have transfer documents in that house," I reminded him. "Trayvon is trying to close the deal today." "Stay on the line," Thomas instructed. I could hear his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Let me access the county real estate portal for their jurisdiction. Trayvon is an arrogant amateur. If he brought physical documents, he likely uploaded the digital precursors to the county clerk system to expedite the recording process." A tense minute passed. I gripped the steering wheel of my minivan, watching the morning traffic slowly pick up on the road ahead. "Got him," Thomas declared, a triumphant edge cutting through his professional composure. "Your brother-in-law is exactly as predictable as we thought. He uploaded the preliminary transfer of deed documents to the county system just an hour ago. He is requesting a rapid digital execution for the sale of Helen's primary estate. The purchase price is listed at exactly $800,000, which is a predatory fraction of its actual market value. When are they executing the final signatures? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. The digital signing ceremony is scheduled for exactly 3 o'clock this afternoon, Thomas replied. That gives us a very narrow window to completely dismantle this operation. If they execute those signatures, reversing the deed transfer becomes a grueling multi-year legal nightmare. We have to stop them before ink hits the paper. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It was just past 8 in the morning. What is the plan? I asked. Listen to me very carefully. Thomas instructed, his voice shifting into absolute command mode. I am currently grabbing my coat and heading to the private terminal at Midway Airport. I am chartering a jet to the Tahoe Regional Airport at the expense of the trust. I will be on the ground by 2 o'clock this afternoon. You are flying out here? I asked, stunned by his immediate mobilization. I would not miss this for the world, Thomas replied fiercely. Helen is not just a client. She is a dear friend, and I will be damned if I let her greedy daughter and some second-rate real estate scammer steal her legacy. While I am in the air, I am going to contact the local Tahoe Police Department. I have colleagues in Nevada who owe me significant favors. I am sending your audit file directly to the Financial Crimes Division. Thomas explained that because the fraudulent $20,000 rental payment was processed across state lines to a Tahoe property management company, local jurisdiction was heavily involved alongside the federal implications. Brenda had essentially committed a major financial crime in their own backyard. We are not just going to stop a real estate transaction today, Thomas said. We are going to secure a live crime scene. The police will be highly motivated to intervene once they see the paper trail you created. What do you need me to do? I asked, feeling a fierce surge of adrenaline. Do not approach that property alone under any circumstances, Thomas warned me sternly. Do not respond to any messages from your mother or your aunt. They are going to realize you know something, and they will try to corner you or manipulate you into keeping quiet. You are the sole trustee, Bethany. You hold the ultimate authority, but you need to let the authorities handle the tactical breach. I understand, I said. I will text you the address of the local police precinct, Thomas continued. You meet me there at 2:30 sharp. We will walk into that mansion flanked by uniformed officers, and we will serve your family with the absolute reality of what they have done. I agreed, thanking him before ending the call. I placed my phone on the passenger seat and leaned back, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The panic and rejection from the previous night had completely evaporated, replaced by a steely, unyielding resolve. I looked out the windshield toward the distant snow-capped peaks where the luxury mansion sat. My family thought they had outsmarted everyone. They thought my silence was guaranteed because I was just the quiet, discarded daughter. They were about to learn that abandoning me was the most expensive mistake they would ever make. The drive back up the winding mountain roads of Lake Tahoe felt entirely different from the grueling journey the night before. Yesterday, I was a desperate, exhausted mother, clinging to the hope of family acceptance. Today, I was a predator, tracking my prey. The scenery outside the minivan window was breathtakingly beautiful. The towering ponderosa pines stood like ancient sentinels against the crisp azure sky, and the sunlight shattered into a million diamonds across the surface of the lake. It was a landscape designed for peace and reflection, a place where people came to escape the toxic realities of the world. Yet nested within that perfect, serene panorama was the glass-walled mansion, currently housing a syndicate of thieves who shared my DNA. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but they were no longer trembling with anxiety or hurt. They were steady. For 34 years, my entire existence had been defined by a desperate, pathetic need to earn a seat at my family's table. I had swallowed every insult excused, every exclusion, and internalized the narrative that my struggles were a personal failing rather than the result of a deliberate systemic dismantling of my self-worth by the people who were supposed to protect me. I had audited my own life, looking for the mistakes that made me unlovable, never realizing the ledger had been rigged from the start. But something profound shifts in a woman When she stops trying to prove she is worthy of being loved and starts proving she is capable of protecting those she loves. I thought of Noah, Liam, and Emma sitting in that cheap motel room eating generic cookies because their grandmother could not be bothered to welcome them into the warmth. I thought of Helen, brilliant and sharp, locked in a sterile room smelling of bleach, stripped of her dignity and her civil rights because her eldest daughter wanted to fund a luxury lifestyle with stolen money. The scapegoat daughter had died on that gravel driveway last night when Amanda crushed that $100 bill into the dirt. The woman driving up this mountain was the sole trustee, and she was bringing the fire. I rolled the window down an inch, letting the freezing mountain air bite against my cheeks to keep my adrenaline sharp. I rehearsed the sequence of events in my mind. Thomas Reed was currently in the air, his private charter cutting across the country. The local police were mobilizing, armed with the digital evidence of interstate wire fraud I had compiled before dawn. The trap was set, and the bait was currently sitting on a foyer console table in the form of property transfer documents. My phone resting in the cup holder buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced down. It was a message from Thomas. Wheels down in 20 minutes. Meet at the precinct as planned. They have no idea what is coming. A cold smile spread across my face. They really had no idea. Brenda was likely holding court right now, pouring mimosas and complaining about my dramatic exit to anyone who would listen. She probably thought my silence meant I was broken, that I had retreated to lick my wounds in some cheap roadside diner before beginning the long drive back to Chicago. She believed her temporary power of attorney made her a god, fundamentally misunderstanding that true power does not announce itself until the checkmate is already secured. Susan was probably nodding along with every word Brenda said, desperate to secure her cut of the illicit payout. My mother had traded her moral compass for a seat in first class, selling out her mother and her grandchildren for a fraction of a stolen estate. Amanda and Trayvon were likely rehearsing their pitch, explaining to the rest of the oblivious family members how their real estate firm was doing Helen a massive favor by taking the property off her hands to cover her tragic, fabricated medical expenses. They were all playing their assigned roles perfectly, completely unaware that the theater was rigged with explosives. The navigation system chimed, indicating I was approaching the final turnoff. The road narrowed, winding through an exclusive enclave of multi-million-dollar vacation homes. The sheer wealth of the area was staggering, a stark reminder of exactly what Brenda and Trayvon were trying to steal. Helen had built her empire through decades of shrewd, relentless hard work. She did not inherit her fortune, she forged it. And she had chosen me, the discarded, overlooked daughter, to be the guardian of that legacy, because she knew I possessed the one trait the rest of them lacked: integrity. I pulled into the gravel lot of the local police precinct right on schedule. The building was a modest, sturdy structure that looked entirely out of place amid the surrounding luxury. I parked my minivan next to a sleek black town car that had clearly just arrived from the private airfield. Thomas Reed stepped out of the town car. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that looked completely incongruous with the rustic mountain setting, carrying a thick leather briefcase that I knew contained the tactical nuclear weapon of this entire operation, the irrevocable trust documents. He did not smile as I approached, but his eyes gleamed with absolute predatory focus. He held out his hand and I shook it firmly. "You ready to go to work, Bethany?" Thomas asked, his voice low and thrumming with anticipation. I looked back up the mountain toward the glass-walled mansion hidden among the pines. I thought of the stolen $20,000. I thought of the fake medical bills. I thought of my children freezing on the driveway. "I have been ready my entire life," I replied. "Let's go collect the trash." "I have been ready my entire life," I replied. "Let's go collect the trash." We rode up the mountain in a tight, purposeful convoy. My minivan led the way, followed closely by Thomas Reed in his sleek black town car, and two marked Nevada police cruisers bringing up the rear. The digital clock on my dashboard flipped to 2:45 in the afternoon. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. We needed to hit the foyer precisely when the ink was hovering over the signature line. My heart beat in a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. There was no panic left in my system, only cold anticipation. We pulled into the expansive circular driveway of the rental mansion. I parked directly behind Amanda's pristine Range Rover, intentionally and aggressively boxing it in. The officers stepped out of their cruisers, their heavy black boots crunching loudly against the gravel. They were serious, no-nonsense veterans of the Financial Crimes Unit, fully briefed by Thomas on the multi-million-dollar interstate fraud occurring inside. Thomas walked up beside me, adjusting his pristine silver cufflinks. He looked at the massive glass and timber structure, then gave me a single sharp nod of readiness. Through the towering glass panels flanking the heavy oak front doors, the scene inside played out like a grotesque parody of a high society gathering. The bright afternoon sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the golden bubbles rising in crystal champagne flutes. The family was gathered around the massive marble island in the gourmet kitchen, which was clearly visible from the entryway. Trevon stood at the head of the island, dressed in a sleek charcoal turtleneck, looking every bit the successful corporate shark. He was gesturing expansively with one hand while tapping a thick stack of manila folders with the other. Even through the thick, soundproof glass, I could read his arrogant body language. He was smoothly explaining the profit margins, outlining the projected cosmetic renovation costs, and detailing the massive payout awaiting them all once Helen's estate was legally flipped. Amanda leaned casually against the counter, swirling her champagne. She wore a smug, self-satisfied smile that signaled she was already mentally spending her cut of the illicit profits on a new country club membership and designer handbags. My mother, Susan, sat perched on a plush velvet bar stool. Her eyes were fixed greedily on the documents, her posture leaning forward, completely captivated by the promise of unearned wealth. And there was Brenda. She stood center stage, basking in her stolen authority. She held an expensive, heavy gold-plated fountain pen in her right hand. She was nodding along to Trayvon's pitch, raising her glass in a celebratory toast to their collective genius. They thought they had won. They thought the difficult part was over, believing that my unceremonious departure last night was the final hurdle cleared. Brenda lowered her glass, set it on the marble counter, and brought the gold pen down toward the signature line of the property transfer deed. The digital clock on my phone hit exactly 3 o'clock. I reached out and grabbed the heavy brass handles of the double doors. They had not locked them, likely expecting a catering delivery, or perhaps just arrogant in their isolated mountain fortress. I pushed the doors open with enough force that they slammed against the interior walls. The loud, violent bang echoed through the cavernous foyer like a gunshot, shattering the peaceful ambiance of the luxury retreat. I stepped over the threshold. I was no longer the exhausted, pleading mother they had discarded in the dirt just hours before. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, my professional leather tote slung over my arm like a battle shield. Thomas Reed stepped in immediately to my right, looking like an apex predator in a tailored suit, his briefcase clutched firmly in his grip. To my left, the two uniformed Nevada police officers walked in their presence, instantly dominating the room. Their thumbs rested casually but deliberately on their heavy tactical belts, and their radios crackled sharply in the sudden, suffocating silence of the mansion. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and absolute. The joyous clinking of crystal glasses ceased immediately. Trayvon froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging slightly open, his hand still hovering over the manila folders containing his fraudulent real estate scam. Amanda jumped violently, splashing pale yellow champagne all over her pristine beige cashmere loungewear. Susan physically recoiled, her hands flying to her mouth as she nearly fell off her velvet bar stool, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic. But Brenda's reaction was the absolute most satisfying to witness. The heavy gold fountain pen slipped entirely from her fingers. It clattered loudly against the marble countertop, rolled off the polished edge, and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clack. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow, terrified, and suddenly very old. Her eyes darted wildly from my calm expression to the fierce, calculating gaze of attorney Thomas Reed, and finally to the gleaming silver badges of the two armed police officers blocking the only exit. Nobody breathed. The only sound in the massive $20,000-a-week mansion was the gentle lapping of the lake water against the private dock outside, and the harsh static hiss of the police radios echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I let the heavy silence stretch intentionally, forcing them to marinate in their sudden, terrifying loss of control. The power dynamic in the room had flipped so violently that the air itself felt charged with electricity. They were trapped. They were exposed. And looking at the sheer terror painting their faces, they knew it. I looked directly at my aunt, holding her panicked gaze with eyes made of absolute ice, letting her know without a single word that the party was officially over. I looked directly at my aunt, holding her panicked gaze with eyes made of absolute ice, letting her know without a single word that the party was officially over. For a fraction of a second, the sheer, unfiltered terror on Brenda's face was deeply satisfying to witness. But decades of unchecked entitlement and narcissistic dominance do not simply evaporate into thin air. The shock melted away almost instantly, rapidly replaced by a volatile defensive rage. Brenda's chest heaved as she drew in a sharp breath, her face twisting into an ugly mask of indignation. She stepped out from behind the marble kitchen island, her silk resort wear billowing around her, and pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. "Officers, arrest her for trespassing!" Brenda screamed, her voice shrill and echoing aggressively off the vaulted timber ceilings. "Arrest her right now. I am the legal occupant of this estate. I rented this property, and this woman is harassing my family. Get her out of my sight." Amanda, desperately trying to salvage the situation, and her ruined cashmere outfit chimed in from the counter. "You heard my aunt? She is trespassing. We are conducting private business here." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I just stood there, flanked by the law, and watched Brenda attempt to command a room that no longer belonged to her. The two Nevada police officers did not move a muscle toward me. They did not reach for their radios or their handcuffs. They simply stared at Brenda with the bored, unimpressed expressions of seasoned law enforcement veterans who had dealt with wealthy, entitled criminals countless times before. One of the officers rested his hand on his utility belt, his gaze sweeping over the champagne bottles and the real estate documents spread across the counter. "I said arrest her!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking as the terrifying reality of their inaction began to set in. She looked wildly from the officers to my mother. "Susan, tell them she does not belong here." My mother opened her mouth, her hands trembling so violently she had to set her wineglass down on the counter to keep it from spilling. But no sound came out. Susan looked at the gleaming silver badges, looked at the thick, imposing files in Thomas Reed's grip, and physically shrank back onto her velvet bar stool. Her self-preservation instincts completely overrode whatever loyalty she had to her older sister. She pressed her lips together, averted her eyes, and remained absolutely silent, abandoning Brenda in the blink of an eye. Seeing Brenda flail in the sudden, suffocating vacuum of her own power was intoxicating. But the execution of this audit was not about petty revenge. It was about precise, surgical justice. I was not going to engage in a screaming match. I was going to let the evidence do the talking. Thomas Reed stepped forward. The seasoned trust attorney moved with the calm, lethal grace of a predator closing in on a cornered animal. His highly polished leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor as he approached the grand living area. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice to